welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I am an Episcopal priest here in Austin, Texas, and coming up on 50 years sober, using the tried and tested 12-step method. They work for me, and they're working for many, many folks out there. The idea behind these podcasts is to go a little deeper into the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, go a little deeper into the spirituality that underlies the program, and to go into the history as well, the Oxford group, where it came from, and particularly an accent on two-way prayer, the form of prayer and meditation that they did in the early days of the AA program. And I would ask you to go to our website titled Two-Way Prayer to study that. So we're doing a study right now of the human shadow, and that's kind of the dark side of the personality. And the guide that we're using for this is Robert A. Johnson. I've used him before. If you want to understand Carl Jung, the best place to start is reading the works of Robert Johnson. And he says that there are three major parts to our personality. And this will just be a very quick review of the first few episodes that we've done on this subject. Johnson talks about the persona, and that is the part of ourselves that our culture says is acceptable. This is the way you should act. So it's often described as the mask that we put on to ourselves, the way we present ourselves in public, the way we want people to see us. It's part of our image. And that's not a bad thing. It's what culture is really all about. That culture is going to say, if you want to belong to this particular tribe, this is how you're going to behave. But then there's another part, and that really refers to the not so acceptable parts. And this is the shadow, the parts that are going on inside of us, but they're not acceptable to common culture. And so we push them down. Parts that tend to get denied. I use the example of putting them in the cellar until, we lock them up down there. Then, except for one day, they tend to explode. And all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And it's like, well, where did that come from? Well, it was the part of me that I've been denying and repressing and pushing down, much like a beach ball under the water, until the pressure becomes too much and there is an explosion. And that explosion can go in two directions. It can go outward towards the people around me, innocent people who are going to get the vent of my anger or fear or whatever the repressed emotion might be, or it can be directed internally towards myself. And this is what often leads to depression. It also leads to relapse in many, many ways. That, is this all there is? I'm being good, and a part of me wants to be bad. A part of me wants to act out. And the only way I know to act out, the only way I know to have fun is through drugs or alcohol or eating, or whatever the particular addiction might be for each one of us. But then in addition to, so it's almost like these two forces are at work operating somewhat against one another, putting a pressure onto us. And it's one way of describing what the human ego is, because it's that middle line that is there to balance the two, to work with the persona and to work with the shadow, and to become the sort of executive agent between those two forces. Who I am. This is who I think I am. That's what ego means. Ego is Latin, and it's simply I am. I remember when I came into the program and had to say, well, my name is Bill and I'm an alcoholic. I almost choked on it because it's not the image of who I wanted to be. And so many of us try to maintain an image that denies who we really are. And that's how we get ourselves into trouble. So this episode is about finding the balance between the extremes of the persona and the shadow, finding that middle point, the equilibrium of who we really are, not as bad as we think and not as good either. So Johnson uses the analogy, and I think it's helpful, of the seesaw. He writes this: it is useful to think of the personality as a teeter-totter or seesaw. Our acculturation consists of sorting out our God-given characteristics and putting the acceptable ones on the right side of the seesaw and the ones that do not conform on the left. It is an inexorable law that no characteristic can be discarded. It can only be moved to a different point on the seesaw. A cultured person is one who has the desired characteristics visible on the right, the righteous side, and the forbidden ones hidden, covered up on the left. All our characteristics must appear somewhere in this inventory. Nothing may be left out. The terrible law prevails, he says, that few people understand and that our culture chooses to ignore almost completely. That is, the seesaw must be balanced if one is to remain in equilibrium. If one indulges characteristics on the right side, they must be balanced by an equal weight on the left side. The reverse is equally true. If this law is broken, then the seesaw flips and we lose our balance. This is how people flip into the opposite of their usual behavior. The alcoholic who suddenly becomes fanatical in his temperance, or the conservative who suddenly throws all caution to the wind, has made such a flip. He has only substituted one side of the seesaw for the other and made no lasting gain. Okay, pull that apart just a little bit here. We alcoholics and addicts, we tend to be extremists. We're going full speed in one direction and then 180 degrees in the other direction. We often get diagnosed mistakenly as manic depressive. Find me in the manic phase when I'm drinking and I'm going to behave in a certain way. Find me in the depressive state, and everything, all the fun, all the joy, all the zip has gone out of life. Back and forth, huh? All or nothing people. Book describes us that way. And this is, I think, one of the reasons that the big book says half measures availed us nothing. For all or nothing people, to give a solution that's only half-assed. Let me be frank here, okay? It's not going to appeal to the addict. We are all or nothing. We're all in, or we're just kind of floating. And that's what's wrong with a lot of us with our programs, that we're not working them as fully as we can. And then that doesn't mean going to one side of the seesaw. It means learning both sides and learning to be comfortable balancing those two. And that's what this episode is really here to teach us. This is why step 4 is so important for us. That we don't know, most of us, what when we come into recovery, what this balance feels like, because we're so out of balance. Step 4 is vital part of that. And then step 5 is vital, I found, because I need someone to help me sort out what I thought was so good about myself versus what I thought was so bad about myself, you know? And I was very confused. I mean, I thought they would ask me, "Are you honest?" Well, of course I'm honest, because I'll tell you what's wrong with you. Well, that ain't honest, you know? That's a distortion of honesty. And I think that for many of us, that's the condition we find ourselves in when we start recovery. And to me, a big part of recovery is doing shadow work, finding out what's going on down there in the basement, and taking some of those demons up and looking at them, and also finding that there's gold buried down there as well. So that's what this balance thing is all about. So Johnson goes on, and he warns that the seesaw may also break at the fulcrum if it is too heavily loaded, the center point. This is psychosis or breakdown. Slang terms are exact in describing these experiences. One must keep the balance intact, though this often requires a very great expenditure of energy. The psyche keeps its equilibrium as accurately as the body balances its temperature, its acid-alkaline ratio, and the many other fine polarities. We take these physical balances for granted, but rarely do we recognize their psychological parallels. I mean, most of us come into recovery and we have no idea of what's happening beneath the surface in that inner world. And that's what Johnson is very, very good at introducing us to. What's happening at the level of the unconscious and affecting us in our moods and our temperament, and helping us see what's going on down there, and not have it driving us. Jung said, we must go and meet the unconscious, or the unconscious is going to come and meet us. And it's usually not very pleasant when it does. Johnson says, I regret the prevailing attitude at present that goodness or sainthood consists of living as much as possible on the right hand, the good side of the seesaw. Sainthood has been caricatured as an image of the all-right person, the person who has transferred everything to the perfect side of his personality. Such a condition would be completely unstable and would flip immediately. The balance would be disrupted and life would be impossible. The fulcrum or center point is the whole, parentheses, holy place. I agree that we must relate to the outer world with the refined product of the good side, but this can be done only by keeping the left side in balance with the right. We must hide our dark side from society in general, or we will be a bloody bore. But we must never try to hide it from ourselves. True sainthood or personal effectiveness consists in standing at the center of the seesaw and producing only that which can be counterweighted with its opposite. This is far from the sentimental view of goodness that has been set up as our ideal. Well, the big book is quick to point out that, we are not saints, but we're not animals either. The big book and recovery is really attempting to take us down that middle road, to look at our assets and our liabilities, to look at what's going on inside of us, and to not let what's going on inside of us control us. So watchfulness is really, really important. And what do I see going on in there? Well, one of the things that I got in touch with was, what the book says, spiritual action. Anytime we're disturbed, there's something wrong with us. Well, what's wrong? What's wrong when my experience? No, not my experience. When my response to a situation is disproportionate to that situation, that's when I know that it's my unconscious that's really reacting to this, and for many of us, it's a level of immaturity. I asked a psychologist when I was going into training to be a counselor. I want to understand alcoholics. I want to understand what's going on in the unconscious mind. What should I read? What books would you advise? And the guy said, well, Bill, just get yourself any good book on child psychology, and you will understand. So that at a deep level, there's an immaturity in us that we're trying to be mature. We're trying to act mature, but we haven't dealt with this 3-year-old kid or 5-year-old kid that's living in the basement, that's living in the shadow. All right. You take a 3 or 4-year-old kid, you watch them, they don't get what they want. Inside, what are they saying? Oh, I hate you. I want to kill you. Well, that's what's going on inside of us. That can be real shadow work, but I'm not going to say that, but I'm going to feel it. You see, I'm going to feel it. Road rage. I'm behind the wheel. I'm 35 years old, whatever I might be. And suddenly the whole world has come up against me and I want to kill somebody. All right. I got in touch with this many, many years ago. My daughter was 1 or 2 years old. Can't recall exactly. But I was taking care of her. My wife was not with me. I was the responsible one. Okay. God help us. And she's sleeping in the same room with me. And 5 times during the night, she woke up crying. And, I would comfort her and take care of her the first time and the second time and the third time. But as I'm doing this, waking up out of a sleep, all right, I started to feel inside of me a rager that wanted to kill. Now, I've never hit my daughter. I wouldn't do anything like that. Thank God, I've got controls that are also operating in my life, but I wanted to. And I got in touch with this inner part of me that was so violent and so out of control. You know what I mean? And I had difficulty owning that. But I did own it. And I have owned it, that there is a part of me that is quite capable of ragefulness. And I need to keep an eye on it. And it has given me some compassion for myself. And it's also given me some compassion for people who for whatever reasons, didn't have the control that I had, and acted on it and hit their kid and wind up in child protective custody or wind up in prison, because what? Because some inner rager, some shadow part of themselves they never dealt with, took control and created chaos in their lives. This shadow stuff, it's not just finding out where I'm good and bad. It's finding out those powers, those forces that are at work within me that can control me, that can kill me, and that can kill and harm others. So this is really, really important work. Johnson continues to describe this inner balance that he's hoping and trying to help us achieve. He says, we cannot make light without a corresponding darkness. And he uses an example from India. He says, India balances Brahma, the god of creation, with Shiva, the god of destruction. And Vishnu sits in the middle, keeping the opposites together. See, that's the role of the ego, is to know the rules, know the forces that are at work against the rules, watch them both carefully, and act appropriately. Johnson says the balance of light and dark are ultimately possible and bearable. All nature lives in polarity, opposites, light and dark, creation and destruction, up and down, life and death, male and female. It is not surprising that we find the same basic laws functioning in our psychological structure. Then he adds a caution, hey? The more refined our conscious personality, in other words, the stronger the persona is, the more we're attached to that image, the more shadow we have built up on the other side. This is one of Jung's greatest insights, that the ego and the shadow come from the same source and exactly balance one another. To make light is to make shadow. One cannot exist without the other. To own one's own shadow is to reach a holy place, an inner center, not attainable in any other way. To fail this is to fail one's own sainthood and to miss the purpose of life. India has 3 terms describing this place of sainthood: Sat, Chit, and Ananda. Sat is the existential stuff of life, mostly the left side of the balance. Chit is the ideal capacity, mostly the right side of the balance. Ananda is the bliss, the joy, the ecstasy, the enlightenment, the fulcrum, the center point of the seesaw. It's watchfulness. When Sat and Chit are paired together and sufficiently conscious, then Ananda, the joy of life, is created. This is one, W-O-N, this is one achieved by owning one's own shadow. So, so much of recovery is beginning to own that which we sense is going on inside of us. I remember early recovery. I'm trying to stay sober, trying to be a good little boy in 12-step recovery. And part of me wanted to drink. Now, what did I do with that? You know what I did with it? I pushed it down. I made it a shadow part, and I tried to deny it. And so on the outside, I'm saying all the right things, but I know I'm lying. All right? I'm lying to people. And because on the inside, this thing is what's going on deep inside. And I reached a point where I was finally able to say that, and I don't know. For me, it was a kind of a breakthrough, and it was a discovery. It was a discovery of my own alcoholism, because the day I accepted that there is a part of me, a deep hidden part of me, that is very destructive, that wants to drink and destroy myself. That's part of what's inside there, and it ain't gonna go away. And actually, the more I pushed it down, the stronger it got. But once I started to own it, once I started to allow it into consciousness, and then to express it, to talk about it with other people. And then I found out what? Hey, they got the same damn thing going on. All of us are contradictions. A part of us wants to drink. A part of us wants to stay sober. A part of us wants to eat ourselves to death. A part of us wants to be abstinent with our food. All right? Those are the powers, the forces that are operating deep within us, deep at the unconscious level. Our job, to own them, to make them conscious, so that they don't drive us. Johnson gives a nice example of how this thing can build up inside of him. He said, I remember a weekend when I put up with very difficult guests who stayed days beyond their invitation. I exercised Herculean patience and courtesy and sighed in great relief when they left. I thought I had earned something nice by my virtue, so I went to the nursery to buy something beautiful for my garden. Before I knew what was happening, I picked a fight with the nurseryman and made a miserable spectacle of myself. Since I did not pick up my shadow consciously, I landed it on this poor stranger. Balance was served, but in a clumsy and stupid way. Okay? He was patient, he was kind, he was generous. But he's not patient, he's not kind, and he's not generous. He's both of those things. Doesn't mean he acts them out, but he needs to be conscious that both are operating. That's what he's saying about this seesaw thing, that you can't have light. You can't create light without also creating darkness. The two go together. And the more light, the more the opportunity for darkness. I don't want to take her inventory, but somebody told me Mother Teresa was a pain in the butt to live with. I kind of got a kick out of that. She's the shining example of holiness and light. Well, she had a dark side too, and so do you, and so do I, and so does every human being. And we have to be very careful not to believe ourselves to be one and not the other. He says many a woman is burdened by paying out the dark side of a creative man. Many a man is drained by carrying the dark side of a woman that is the byproduct of her creativity. Worst of all, children often have to carry the dark side of creative parents. It is proverbial that the minister's child will be difficult, and the wealthy man's child is in danger of leading a meaningless life. The sins of one man are passed on to the third and fourth generation. I mean, if we study family of origin, we get to see how our parents often pass on to us the shadow stuff, the unlived stuff that they've never dealt with. And not suddenly, but unconsciously, yeah, that's the word I'm looking for, unconsciously, they're going to pass that on to their children. Watch them do it. So how much of my own junk is my junk, or is it my father's junk, or my mother's junk, or my grandfather's junk that got passed on from generation to generation? I need to watch for those things. I need to say, that's not mine. That's yours. And I've carried it. And I've carried it for too long. All right. And I want to give it back to you. I want to give it back to you. And that's shadow work. To go inside, to see what's going on in there, to own it, sort it out, what's yours, what's theirs, and give it back to them if it's not yours. All right. Johnson makes another point, and so does Jung, that there is the personal shadow, and that's what we've kind of been talking about so far, but that there is also a collective shadow, a shadow that accumulates around a country, a religion, an institution, where it needs to be examining itself carefully. Otherwise, it will pass on its shadow parts and project them onto somebody else. So this is the collective shadow. We are good and holy, but they are the enemy. I grew up Irish Catholic in New York. We were the good guys. If you weren't part of that tribe, there was something wrong with you. Something wrong with you. I mean, we've done some growth in becoming multicultural, but we got to watch out for this, because what we want to do with that collective shadow is dump it onto somebody else. The Germans are, of course, the classic example of that in World War II. How they are the good guys. They are the superior race, and everything negative that's going on within them, but that they won't see, they project that onto others. So it's Jews, it's homosexuals, it's anyone who doesn't fit the perfect image. Boom, you carry our shadow. And it brought the death of millions and millions of people. So this is dangerous stuff. It's dangerous on the individual level, unrecognized, unchecked, and it's dangerous on the national level. Johnson says, he grew up in the 50s, hating and fearing the Soviet Union, and I did too. I mean, that was the era, that they were the enemy. They were out to kill us, and we were, You had better be on guard so that we can kill them. All right? Until the Berlin Wall comes down. And when it does, something shifts inside. Somehow we get to see them as human beings, maybe for the first time. That they're human beings, they're not projections of our own shadow. And when we do, maybe they're not so bad. Maybe we can talk to them. Maybe we can relate to them. Maybe we can share with them. But interestingly, as soon as it comes down with them, it gets shifted. Now the Iranians, the Iraqis, the Arabs get to carry that shadow part. We love to place it outside of ourselves, because if we do that, we don't have to look at ourselves. Now it's back on the Russians yet again. All right. Johnson writes this. He says, a whole generation can live a modern, civilized life without ever touching much of its shadow nature. Then, predictably, 20 years is the allotted time, that unlived shadow will erupt and a war will burst forth that no one wanted, but to which everyone, both men and women, have contributed. Apparently, the collective need for shadow expression supersedes the individual determination to contain the dark. And so it happens that an era of disciplined creativity is always followed by an astounding display of alienation. There are better ways of coping with the shadow, but until they are common knowledge, we will continue to have these outbursts in the most destructive form. Dr. Jung has pointed out that it requires a sophisticated and disciplined society to fight a war as long and complicated as World Wars I and II. He said that primitive people would have tired of their war in a few weeks and gone home. They would not have had a great accumulation of shadow, since they live more balanced lives and never venture as far from the center as we do. It was for us civilized people to bring warfare to its high development. And so the greater the civilization, the more intent it is upon its own destruction. God grant that evolution may proceed quickly enough for each of us to pick up our own dark side, combine it with our hard-earned light, and make something better of it, all than the opposition of the two. This would be true holiness. Just a little aside here that if you do become a student of AA history and you start looking into Frank Bookman and the origins of the steps, they came within the context of the period between World War I and World War II. Frank Bookman, the originator of the Oxford Group program, was absolutely convinced that if we didn't find a better way to relate to one another, and if we didn't own our own stuff, not take the other guy's inventory, but take our own and share that with one another, that if we didn't do that, there was going to be another war. That what he saw after World War I, which was absolutely devastating in the psyche of Europe, and the world had never seen a war like that. And what he was convinced of was that if we don't find a better way, there's going to be another war, and it's going to be devastating. And so you had people trying to develop different isms at that time as a solution. So you had Nazism growing up, you had fascism growing up in Italy and Spain. You had unbridled capitalism growing up in the United States and in England. You had communism taking root in Russia and beyond. All of these isms. And what Bookman said was, not one of these isms is going to be the solution. There's got to be a change, one man, one woman at a time. All right, and if that happens, if they have a psychic change, if they begin to own their own shadows, what was their part in the conflict? Will they take responsibility for it rather than foisting it on to someone else? He said, if we will do that, we can avoid another war. Well, we couldn't do that. And we had another war. And what happens at the collective level is the exact same thing as what happens on the individual level. So this shadow work is really important. It's vital that we learn to go inside, to find that center point, to see that we are both light and darkness, to own those within our psyches, not to give expression to the negative, to the left-hand side, but to own it, and there's great freedom. There's great freedom that comes with that, that there's parts of me that are want to be a thief, want to be a pirate, want to be a robber, want to be a murderer. There they are, I'm not going to act on them. I'm not going to act on them, but I am going to own them. Okay, I am going to own them. And if that part of me surfaces again that I want to drink, I got to ask myself, what's that about? What is it that I'm not living out in me? Is it the excitement? Is it the fun? Is it the joy? It's going to be that unlived part because I'm trying to be too good. I'm trying to be too right, and I'm going on 50 years with not drinking, but finding other ways to express those things inside of me and share them with other people and not be so ashamed of them. That's shadow work. That's inventory. That's steps 4 and step 10. It's freedom. It's freedom. So we're gonna look a little deeper next time at projection. That's the next part of his chapter here, and then we're going to look at doing some active shadow work, how to talk to these parts, how to engage them, and how to find that center balance part in our lives. Okay. I hope this was helpful information. I know it's kind of deep stuff, but I think it's important. And if we can learn some of the stuff that's going on, maybe it's not going to control us nearly as much as perhaps it has in the past. So I thank you for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.